It was August 1944, and Paris, once the heart of European culture, lay draped in silence and moonlight. The thud of German boots echoed down alleyways lined with blackout curtains. Curfews were strict, eyes averted, whispers carried risk. But through that darkness moved a small French family, a mother clutching her newborn, a father steering them through the maze of occupied streets, and a child who stumbled on a loose cobblestone just before they reached home. For a frozen moment, they stood in terror. One sound, one mistake, could summon death. In this moment of silence and fear, we ask, what does life look like when your country is no longer yours? What do people become under occupation, collaborators, victims, or quiet resistors? This is not the story of battlefield triumphs or political treaties. This is the story of daily survival, of a nation shackled not only by a foreign army, but by hunger, fear, and betrayal. This is the story of France under Nazi rule. A story not only of tanks and trenches, but of ration cards, curfews, and whispered resistance. The fall came quickly. On June 22, 1940, following a lightning-fast 6-week campaign, France surrendered to Adolf Hitler's armies. The once proud French military had been outmaneuvered, encircled, and humiliated. 2 million French soldiers were taken prisoner. Entire towns were overrun. Paris was declared an open city and fell without a fight. What followed was not full annexation, but a strategic division. France was split in two. The northern and western zones, including Paris and the coastline, were placed under direct German military occupation. The south, nominally governed by Marshal Philippe Pétain from the Spa town of Vichy, became a puppet regime, one that would soon collaborate deeply with the Nazis. Italy, Hitler's junior partner in the war, was awarded a sliver of southeastern France as a token prize. But make no mistake, all of France, whether in Vichy or Paris, was under the shadow of the swastika. And that shadow fell long and deep. One of the first changes came quietly and symbolically. The German administration moved French clocks forward by 1 hour, to align with Berlin time. The mornings became darker. The nights arrived sooner. It was a subtle but potent reminder, time itself no longer belonged to the French. Curfews were imposed, first midnight to 6 a.m., then earlier and earlier, in response to sabotage and unrest. Radios were confiscated. Listening to BBC broadcasts or any enemy propaganda became a criminal offence. The ban on hostility to occupiers was written vaguely, intentionally so. A dirty look or a refusal to serve coffee to a German soldier could be grounds for arrest. A quiet resistance began not with bullets, but with silent defiance. In Paris, German soldiers flooded the streets. On leave from the Eastern Front, they filled cafes and cabarets, where they paid with Reichsmarks exchanged at a fixed rate, 20 francs to 1 mark. To the average German private, this meant one thing: everything was cheap. Wine, cheese, clothes, art, all available for a fraction of their worth, if you were wearing a uniform. Luxury hotels like the Hotel Ritz and L'Amoureux became Nazi headquarters. Looting, while unofficial, was rampant. Trainloads of goods, from fine wines to priceless paintings, departed France for Berlin each day. The cultural rape of France had begun. But while paintings vanished into private collections and cheeses filled German mess halls, something far more devastating was about to unfold. The Nazi occupation wasn't merely military, it was economic, psychological, and existential. By 1941, France's daily caloric intake had plummeted. Where pre-war adults consumed around 2,400 calories per day, the average fell to between 1,200 and 1,500. Bread became coarse and grey. Meat was rare. Eggs were priceless. The government issued ration cards for everything: butter, coal, clothing. These cards became currency, and they invited corruption. In the countryside, black markets thrived. Farmers traded chickens, wine, and butter in secret for cash or favors. Some fed the resistance, others just fed their children. The Vichy regime issued threats, but many French people simply ignored them. The divide between city and village widened. In cities like Paris, people starved. In the countryside, they smuggled. Bartering networks sprang up between rural villages and urban neighborhoods. Sometimes entire trainloads of goods were hijacked. At other times, it was just a basket of apples passed through a window. Yet this fragile ecosystem of resilience was under constant threat, not just from German forces, but from fellow French citizens. The Milice, a paramilitary force loyal to the Vichy government, was created to hunt down resistance fighters, enforce labor quotas, and suppress unrest. Some joined the Milice for ideology. Others for protection, many for the promise of extra rations and exemption from forced labor. Their most feared tactic: interrogation and torture. Suspects were beaten, electrocuted, mutilated. Children were threatened. Wives were raped in front of their husbands. Confessions, real or fabricated, followed. These confessions led directly to massacres. Entire villages were burned in retaliation for resistance activity. Families executed. Children shot. One German officer summed it up coldly: "We shoot the innocent. It terrifies the guilty." By 1944, dozens of towns in France were little more than smoldering graveyards. And yet, the resistance grew. As the Nazi war machine faltered on the Eastern Front and Allied bombers pounded the Reich from above, Germany's need for manpower grew dire. Factories lay in ruins. German men were dying by the tens of thousands on the steppes of Russia. Berlin looked to its conquered lands to fill the void. France was now not just an occupied territory, it was a reservoir of labor. At first, the Nazis tried propaganda. Posters in metro stations and village squares showed smiling French workers operating precision machinery in clean, orderly factories. One popular slogan read, "They are freeing prisoners. You are helping France." This was the releve system, introduced in 1942. For every 3 French workers who volunteered to work in German industry, the Germans would release 1 French prisoner of war. It was sold as a patriotic sacrifice, a way to reunite families and do one's duty. But few volunteered. Most French men and women saw through the veil. And so the mask came off. In February 1943, Hitler appointed Fritz Sauckel as the General Plenipotentiary for Labor Deployment, a title that masked a far darker role. Sauckel was soon known across Europe as the Slava of the Reich. His job was simple: to fill German factories with foreign labor, by any means necessary. With Berlin's approval, the Vichy government implemented the Service du Travail Obligatoire (STO), compulsory work service. Under the STO, all healthy French males between 18 and 50, and single women aged 21 to 35, could be drafted. Resistance or evasion could result in arrest, deportation, or even execution. The promise of power releases was quietly shelved. It was no longer a choice. It was slavery by pen stroke. Over 600,000 French citizens would be sent to work in German factories, many in appalling conditions. Some were never seen again. Others returned scarred, emaciated, or physically broken. And for many young Frenchmen, the choice became stark: work for Hitler, or disappear into the forests. The Maquis, named after the rough Corsican underbrush where bandits once hid, began as a trickle. Draft dodgers and deserters slipped into the wilderness. They built camps in the mountains, the hills, the forests of Auvergne, the Cevennes, and the Vosges. But as Nazi brutality escalated, the trickle became a flood. By 1944, the Maquis numbered in the tens of thousands. Many were armed only with stolen pistols, old hunting rifles, or weapons dropped by the British Special Operations Executive, SO. But they had something more important than firepower: they had local support. French farmers hid them, villagers passed messages, Catholic priests smuggled supplies, women worked as couriers, medics, and messengers, often at enormous personal risk. And the Maquis struck back. They blew up railway lines, sabotaged German convoys, ambushed patrols, and raided armories. Their knowledge of local terrain, and their decentralized structure, made them almost impossible to eradicate. But their very success brought terrible vengeance. The Nazi response to partisan activity was based on one principle: collective punishment. One of the most notorious examples occurred in the tiny village of Oradour-sur-Glane. On June 10, 1944, just 4 days after D-Day, the SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, stopped in the village. Acting on a false rumor that a German officer had been captured there, they rounded up all the women and children and locked them in the church. They set it on fire. Those who tried to escape were shot. 642 civilians were murdered, some burned alive, others gunned down in barns. The village was never rebuilt. To this day, its ruins remain untouched, a memorial to what hatred can do when unrestrained. This was not an isolated act. Dozens of villages across France were wiped off the map. Farms burned, livestock slaughtered, civilians executed at random. And through it all, the Maquis fought on, not just for France, but for dignity, memory, and revenge. As Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the resistance exploded into coordinated action. Railways were torn up to delay German reinforcements. Bridges were destroyed. Entire German columns vanished into forests and didn't come out. Allied commanders acknowledged the resistance's critical role. General Eisenhower later estimated that resistance fighters delayed German troop movements by up to 2 full weeks, time that allowed the Allies to secure the beaches and push inland. In southern France, Operation Dragoon, the lesser-known counterpart to D-Day, brought liberation from the opposite direction. German forces began to collapse under pressure from both north and south. And in Paris, the people rose. By August 19, 1944, skirmishes had broken out across Paris. Resistance fighters seized government buildings, sabotaged communications, and blockaded German garrisons. Despite being lightly armed, they waged a city-wide rebellion. Police stations were stormed, milice members were arrested, some were executed on the spot. Others were spared, only to be put on trial later. On August 25, Free French forces under General Leclerc entered the city. In a now famous moment, the Nazi governor of Paris, General Dietrich von Choltitz, surrendered the city, disobeying Hitler's direct orders to destroy it. The capital had been saved, not just by tanks, but by the will of its people. Liberation brought celebration, but it also brought revenge. The joy of French victory quickly gave way to a period of brutal reckoning known as the Opération Sauvage, the Wild Purge. In the weeks following liberation, thousands of suspected collaborators were rounded up across France, not by the courts, but by neighbors, resistance fighters, and returning POWs. Many were beaten, some were shot without trial. Others faced a different kind of punishment, one that would become an infamous symbol of this chaotic time. Head shaving. Women accused of horizontal collaboration, often with little evidence, had their heads forcibly shaved in public squares. Some were stripped, paraded through the streets, branded as traitors. Their crime? Relationships with German soldiers, whether romantic, coerced, or transactional. It's estimated that 10,000 to 20,000 people were killed in the Wild Purge. Many of them without any legal process. Some were guilty, many were not. Eventually, General Charles de Gaulle's provisional government stepped in to restore order and begin a legal purge, Opération Légale. Courts were established. Trials were held. The goal was to distinguish justice from vengeance. Over the next few years, 125,000 people were tried for collaboration. 6,763 were sentenced to death. About 800 executions were carried out. Prominent figures from the Vichy regime, including Pétain and Laval and Marshal Pétain, were tried. Laval was executed. Pétain, once a national hero of World War I, was sentenced to death, but de Gaulle commuted it to life imprisonment. He died in exile, a symbol of what many considered the shame of France. As the dust settled, France faced a deeper question, not of courts, but of collective memory. Who had resisted? Who had collaborated? And who had simply tried to survive? General de Gaulle promoted the myth of a nation of resistors. According to this narrative, the majority of French people had opposed the Nazis in their hearts, even if they hadn't taken up arms. Vichy was portrayed as an aberration, a small group of traitors, soon forgotten. This myth helped restore national pride and political unity, but it came at a cost. The full truth, of complicity, fear, opportunism, and the complexity of human behavior under occupation, was buried for decades. Not until the 1970s and 80s did France begin to confront its own role more honestly. Filmmakers, historians, and survivors broke the silence. They told stories not only of heroism, but of moral ambiguity, grief, and compromise. They told stories like that of Oradour-sur-Glane, the burned village left untouched as a permanent ruin, a place where time froze on the day it was destroyed. France emerged from the occupation battered but unbroken. Over 150,000 civilians had died. Tens of thousands had been deported, executed, or disappeared. Entire villages had been emptied. Families had been split for years. The economy was in ruins. The railways, roads, and bridges, targeted by both Nazis and Allies, were shattered. But so was something less visible: trust. Trust in the state. Trust in neighbors. Trust in the myth of national unity. Still, within a few years, France would be at the center of a new Europe, a founding member of NATO, and later, the European Economic Community. It rebuilt its economy, reformed its democracy, and began, slowly, to reckon with the ghosts of its past. Yet scars remain, not only in ruined villages, but in family histories, in the silence around dinner tables, in the bitter memories passed down through generations. The story of occupied France is not a neat tale of villains and heroes. It is the story of a nation surviving in the shadow of tyranny, of ordinary people facing impossible choices, and of what remains when the boots stop marching. What would you do under occupation? Would you resist, at the cost of your family? Would you collaborate, to feed your children? Would you wait and hope, and pray no one asks questions? History often glorifies the brave and condemns the traitors. But in between lies a vast grey space, full of people who loved, feared, hid, lied, endured, and quietly helped where they could. France survived the occupation, but the real question is, did it ever fully recover from it? This has been Legacy Files. If this story moved you, unsettled you, or made you reflect, we invite you to subscribe and explore more of history's hidden corners. The past is never truly past. It waits in the silence, until someone dares to remember.